A budget tells us what we can't afford, but it doesn't keep us from buying it. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today is Budget 2024. Joining us this evening on the show are Sujeeva Mudulige, Chartered Accountant, Suresh Perera, Principal Head of Tax and Regulatory, KPMG Sri Lanka, Raj Prabhu Raj Kulendran, Lead Economist, Verity Research, Rohan Tatukorala, former Chairman of EDB and also Tourism. You too can join in as far as the conversation is concerned. You can send in your messages to 076 656 5353. The number once again, 076 656 5353. And on to my immediate right today is Attorney at Law Ravindra Jayakuri to pose questions from our panelists. So let's get the ball rolling with Sujeeva Mudulige, Chartered Accountant. First of all, Sujeeva, retired, now free to express your views without any harm or fear, so you can do so today. I open the platform with you today.
Thank you for the kind invitation to be here tonight. So 78th budget, which was delivered 2 days ago. So let me first look at some of the positives that's there in some of the budget proposals. So first thing to keep in mind is that President Wickremesinghe as Finance Minister has delivered this budget under extremely difficult circumstances. The macroeconomic environment is very challenging, tough and unforgiving. So so you must give credit to him on that. Number two is next year is an election year. So keeping that in mind, I think this budget, he has to some extent, some of the handouts have been curtailed to a great extent. And it doesn't appear to be an election budget. So you need to give credit to him as well. Knowing, and he clearly said during his budget speech that there will be 2 elections next year. Third one, I also feel that the government has tried their best to tick all the boxes as far as IMF is concerned. You could clearly see the EFF, the Extended Finance Facility Program, requirements have been met to a great extent. So that's not a bad thing as well. So we need to make sure that we comply with IMF requirements. Fourth one, there is a clear message coming from the President, live within your means. I think in that initial, before the budget proposals, I think during his initial introduction, he clearly said, we've mismanaged the economy big time over the last 75 or so years. Time for us to sort of relook at how we have been managing the economy, and told the people very clearly, you just cannot give handouts and we got to live within our means. So that's some of the positives which I see. So some of the issues which I have on this at a very high level, we can go into them in detail, is that the revenue numbers as usual are very optimistic in my view. If you take, I don't want to go back 75 years, but if you take the last 23 years since year 2000, we've never had a year where we have achieved the revenue numbers. Not a single year. 23, 0. Right? 23 years we have not met the numbers. And in almost all cases, we have exceeded the expenditure budget. So revenue, we are unable to collect. Expenditure, we go and overspend. And I don't see a difference in that even in this 2024 budget as well. So that's one of the issues which I have. We can go into it in detail. Second one is that we have acknowledged for the first time that our banking sector needs support. We always talked about it, saying that the banking sector is vulnerable, it needs to be supported. Very happy to see a 450 billion allocation. 450 billion allocation, mainly to infuse capital to the 2 state banks, because they have been drained out by the loss-making SOEs, which is something really good. And also, on the expenditure side, one of the issues which I have is that I don't see any slowing down in expenditure. We can go to, let's go to it in detail later on, because it's 2 things. How do you increase revenue? How do you manage your expenditure? And basically what the IMF is telling you is manage your deficit. It doesn't matter whether you increase your revenue or whether you cut down expenses, but manage your deficit. So one way of cutting down the deficit is manage your expenses, right? And I don't think we have done that. So, so let me stop at that for the moment. Let's get into details later.
I'm not going to let you go yet, Sujiva. You spoke about the Samanjeevi Katha, the concept of Buddhism that President Ranil Wickremesinghe clearly articulated during the opening segment of his budget speech. The concept is about balancing. I want to ask you a question. Now, recently we saw the sugar tax being increased from 25 cents to 50 rupees overnight. We've seen this as a second spade, giving an advantage to those who are holding a monopoly in the sugar business. Is this the balancing that President Ranil Wickremesinghe was referring to?
So interesting one. So as you know, about a year ago, we brought it down from 50 rupees to 25 cents. And then the Auditor General had estimated that the loss was about 15 to 16 billion, right? I'm no expert, but I'm just picking up from the number that he mentioned. And that was done overnight. And even this, without anyone's knowledge, it went up back again from 25 cents to 50 cents. So the issue here
50
is,
rupees.
Sorry, 50 rupees per kilo. So the issue here is there is so much power that is vested on the minister. It's the trade minister. Yeah, just the stroke of a pen. You know, he can reduce it, he can increase it, and maybe we need to go into it in detail. But the saddest part is that we don't seem to be able to hold people accountable. And this is on the background where just 2 days ago we had the CEA chairman being caught accepting a bribe of 10 million rupees, and this is just, you know, tip of the iceberg. I mean, there's enough evidence that, and also taking into account the special review done by IMF on governance. And not only that, just before I close, is that the central bank governor himself said recently, and I give credit to him, he was bold enough to say this, one of the reasons why we are unable to attract FDI, he said, is because of corruption. And he was bold enough to say that. We are unable to get FDI is because of corruption. One of the main reasons is corruption. I mean, our business environment is not friendly at all. We have huge issues on that. But this is it's a massive problem. We need to tackle it.
President Ranil Wickremesinghe has a task at hand to balance matters in the next few weeks for sure.
Absolutely.
Coming in for the budget vote, because it seems that the ruling party is now split with regard to their decision to support the budget or not. So we'll have to wait and see.
Yes.
Let me now move my attention towards Suresh Pereira, Principal, Head of Tax and Regulatory, KPMG Sri Lanka. What are your thoughts on Budget 2024?
Right, before I get into the budget, let me continue where Sujiva stopped with regard to this issue with regard to the sugar scam. So I think we need to understand the exact framework why this is happening. Now there's an important point, you know, if some of you all must have seen this IMF report issued on the 30th September with regard to the 16-point plan. In that one, you can see point number 11 is, I'm reading it from the report itself, amend tax legislation to eliminate or restrict ministerial authority to introduce tax changes without prior parliamentary approval and ensure that such changes do not generate revenue losses. So IMF report directly refers to that. Now the background to this is this: there is a constitutional principle embedded at Article 148 of the Constitution that full control of the public finance must be with the Parliament. So it is the Parliament that can increase or decrease taxes. It's the Parliament that can impose the taxes, nobody else. So now when you look at the composition of this Special Commodity Levy Act, this sugar prices are being maneuvered, increase, reduce, etc. under this Special Commodity Levy Act. So this Special Commodity Levy Act gives the power to the Minister in charge of Finance or to the Minister to specify the rate at which a particular commodity should be taxed. So how does this mechanism work? Gazette is published specifying a rate, and then from that day, from midnight, that rate is applicable. Thereafter, this gazette should be brought before the Parliament for approval. So the Parliament can approve or disapprove. So let's say after 3 months this gazette is presented in the Parliament, and if the Parliament happens to reject that increase, let's say, or the reduction, it is from the date on the resolution passed in the Parliament that disapproval or the approval take place. So if it is disapproved by the parliament, any activity that was carried out during that interim period from the date of publication of that gazette and the disapproval by the parliament remains valid. In other words, during this period, it is the minister's wish that prevails. So that goes against the concept of full control of the public finance by the parliament, which is embedded at the Article 148 of the Constitution. So in 2005, the Special Commodity Levy Act, though contrary to the Constitution, was passed because nobody challenges. According to the Constitution, there is a process. If somebody, unless somebody goes and challenges it, once it is passed by the parliament, it remains law. Thereafter, we don't have after passing a statute, you can't challenge it thereafter. So here it was not done. But parallel to this, there's another incident, another example that happened in the past. There was a bill called Special Goods and Services Bill that was drafted, and that tried to introduce a single tax rate, or rather basically give the power to the minister to decide the rate and have a single tax called the Special Goods and Services Tax in relation to few identified areas: alcohol, telecom, tobacco, etc., motor vehicles, etc. Now, when this bill was placed in the order paper, this was challenged in the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court, among other things, pointed out this aspect, this feature of where minister gets the power to specify the rate or specify the items that will be covered by this act is not in accordance with the Constitution, and this statute, this bill was thrown out of the parliament. So that's why we don't have this Special Goods and Services Tax in operation, which was in that. So in 2005, if this Special Commodity Levy Act was also challenged in the Supreme Court, this would have been the verdict would have been the same. But since it was not, now it's there. So that is why it is happening. So in order to rectify this issue for the future, the Special Commodity Levy Act should be abolished. So then this will not happen. You can't give ministerial authority in a country, in a third world country like ours, though it gives the flexibility for operation, it absolutely it can lead to malpractice. So it has to be taken out.
But looking at that aspect, Suresh, look at what has happened to Sri Lanka cricket. You know, the minister takes a decision, and then it's overruled by the cabinet, and the president appoints another subcommittee headed by the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Anyway, that's a laughable matter. We won't discuss it now.
I'm not going to
on this show today, but on a later date. But Suresh, what is your take on tax? Because tax is an important component. What are your thoughts on budget 2000?
Correct. So when you look at the budget in relation to the taxation, here actually we don't see many tax proposals. Actually, we don't see specific revenue proposals quantified shown in the budget speech here. But we do find basically this is not in relation to increase of taxes. This is not in relation to the reduction of taxes. This budget is all about collection of the taxes from the existing rules that are there, other than the VAT. Right. So in case of VAT, we do find there is a reference to increase the VAT rate from 15% to 18%, but that was known before the budget also, because there is a bill before the parliament in relation to that. And in addition to that, if anything that is new in relation to the VAT here is the statement that is there in the Annexure 6 of the budget speech to eliminate almost all the exemptions that are in the VAT Act, other than education, health and certain essential goods. So
are you trying to tell me that electricity, water will be subjected to VAT?
Well, according to the statement that is in the Annexure 6 of the budget speech, of course that would be the result. But we don't know in practice whether it was meant in that way, or whether how this will work out. We'll have to keep our fingers across the tree.
So beginning January, when I'm paying my electricity bill, I'll have to pay a VAT on top of that.
Right. So what will happen is if that concept is included at the committee stage to the existing bill that is before the parliament, yes, that will be the consequence. So I still have my doubts whether it will go to that extent. Right now in the VAT Act there are about 300 exemptions which should not be, because when you look at for VAT mechanism to work properly, actually almost all the economic areas in a country should have VAT.
So before I get on to Raj, a very quick question to Suresh. Suresh, when we looked at budget 2024, there seems to be some progressive decisions that are taken. One is making sure that everyone in the country, may it be a vehicle owner, may it be a house owner, he'll have to open a TIN, a tax identification number. Do you see this as practical?
Yes, let me correct you there. This is not about opening, registering for TIN. This is about submitting a copy of the TIN certificate to bank to open a current account.
Yes.
To submit the copy of the TIN certificate to the registrar to register a motor vehicle or to renew the vehicle license. To obtain a building approval, you must submit a copy of the TIN certificate. So the idea here is basically, when you have this requirement embedded in the law, and if this is enforced, that everyone who wants to engage in a commercial transaction of this nature should be registered for VAT. So this is a measure to expand the income tax base.
But that's progressive.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course, definitely.
Such decisions have to be taken.
Correct.
So you can see that as a plus point as far as budget.
Definitely, yes. So that's why I said in this budget, basically, what is happening is it's not the taxes are going up or taxes are coming down. Here, basically, enforcement of the existing tax laws are being addressed. Tax collection is being addressed.
Right. Thank you very much, Suresh. I now move my attention towards Raj Kulendran, lead economist, Verite. I'll pose a question to you, Raj, just to get some direction to the show tonight. You all do a fact check as well at Verite. How factual was the budget 2024 speech made by President Ranil Wickremesinghe in his capacity as the Minister of Finance?
So the budget, we do a live fact checking of the budget speech, and I think the budget speech was fairly factual in the sense he addresses that the problems are there and the crisis we've had.
And we don't need a president to do that, no?
The concern that we have is that the symptoms of the crisis have really reduced. Like there is no fuel crisis, no power cuts, but the crisis very well remains. And the path forward for 2024 is, are we seeing a sustainable recovery or an unsustainable recovery? Because when we look at countries that have restructured since 1975, there are 75 countries that did restructuring, and more than 50%, so 59% of the countries have to do it more than once, which means that is Sri Lanka going to also restructure again, and will Sri Lanka be able to bear the cost of it? So when we are looking forward for 2024, the focus should be on sustainable recovery and not just recovery or not just completing the IMF program. It should be sustainable recovery and ensuring that Sri Lanka doesn't get into another debt crisis again. And with regards to the budget, of course, like said earlier, the revenue targets not being met. Even 2023 was an ambitious revenue target. We expected a 68% increase in revenue. We've gotten so far a 42% increase based on the revised numbers. And this is behind high levels of inflation. When you have high levels of inflation, it allows you to collect more tax revenue as well. But 2024, we expect inflation to come down. The central bank has announced a target of 5%, around 5%. So when your inflation is not that high, that doesn't help you collect as much as revenue as you want. But now we're expecting a 45% increase, majority of it coming from VAT because of the rate hike and all of the removal of exemptions. But we have the classic problem of since revenue is always overestimated. Last year, revenue was overshot by 15%. We don't see any analysis to show that this year we will meet our revenue targets. And usually what happens is for 2023
this is not a steep budget as expected, because if you look at it, Raj, correct me if I'm wrong, the expenditure stands, the revenue collection stands at 4.127 billion, whereas the expenditure stands at 6,978 billion. So if you look at it, the budget deficit alone is only 2,851 billion.
Sure.
Not that bad compared to the previous years that we've seen.
The reason being is that previous year, it's because you've also, the revenue measure seems a bit optimistic, and usually what happens is, especially in 2023, we have a revenue shortfall, but we want to meet the budget deficit target, so we cut down capital expenditure. That's exactly what's happened this year. So the revenue shortfall is exactly compensated by reducing capital expenditure, because recurrent is quite hard to reduce. But the bigger problem for 2024 is usually, historically we budgeted 5% of GDP capital expenditure, we spend 4% of GDP capital expenditure. But this year we've budgeted only 3.9% of GDP capital expenditure, which is usually the actual we spend. So you've reduced that buffer is what.
So Raj, in terms of investment and development, creating investment zones, infrastructure cooperation, development of tourist destinations, including Punrin City, development of Trincomalee as a major economic centre, allocation of funds for the Hangarakat International Airport, development of the second phase of the Central Expressway have been addressed in the budget. So is this necessary for us this year?
The bigger problem of necessary or not is that this is the 7th time we are announcing investment zones in a budget. Since 2017, it's always mentioned. The thing is, we don't implement these. So the budget, even I think we've done something called budget promises, where we track all of the budget proposals. Most of the progress is either not disclosed, and 97% of it is not disclosed, so they don't tell us the progress. And I think this is needed for investment. Yes, investments and foreign direct and external trade, because our reserves are quite low, but highly likely that these are not going to be implemented based on historical progress. So there's a constant thing. I think even the tax ombudsman on revenue side was announced last year, never really happened. So the constant thing is that, is this just a manifesto? Is this just fake promises?
We have an anti-corruption bill. That bill is not been implemented. So we have issues, no?
I think both of them also highlighted on governance, and I think governance is also critical, but the implementation is also critical for.
Thank you very much, Raj. I now move my attention towards Rohan Tatakora, the former chairman of EDB and Tourism.
Thank you very much.
Rohan, may I ask you questions to get some direction, so it's easier for us to navigate the discussion. If you look at budget 2024, I've heard Sri Lankans always have expectations when it comes to budgets. I still remember me sitting in 1993 outside my house looking at the budget. My grandma made some cookies, so we were all sitting outside and expecting the budget proposals to be delivered by the then finance minister of the country. So budgets are always expectations for the people. Should it be like that?
Thank you, Shamil, for the invite. My background is from multinationals, working for British multinationals and the UN for about 25 years. So the way I look at it, Shamil, is anytime when there is a crisis, it's good, because you go back to the drawing boards and you're asked to understand what the problem is. So when the economic crisis hit, there were all sorts of stories going around as to what really caused this economic crisis. Now, yesterday, a landmark decision was made where it was told that 7 people are responsible for it, and they have zeroed down into 3 reasons as to why the economic crisis happened, which is the 681 billion tax rebate that was given, and then the 500 billion ISB, as well as the delay in the IMF. So, Shamil, for the first time, we have understood in Sri Lanka what the real problem was. Now, IMF, also being smart, working across different countries, have also identified what the issue was. And for the first time in the history of whole of Asia, they did this thing called the governance diagnosis assessment. And now, from the diagnostic assessment, what comes out is that corruption and governance is critical. The answer to the question you asked, Shamil, which is what was the expectation of people?
Now, must we have expectations?
Absolutely, and the expectations was very simple. What they said was, we have heard a perception saying that it was corruption that took us to this debacle. Now a verdict has come on that, and now you have the IMF rhetoric once again being justified inside. And IMF said end of September in their second tranche discussion that you had an issue with regard to governance and your collections, and they're given a 16-point plan. I'm pretty disappointed, Shamil, on budget 2024, because what I was expecting was, at least now, let's see the reality as it is and said, let's correct the problem. And you are so rightly discussing about the sugar scam, where 10 billion has come up for the second time. First round it was 16 billion. We saw the same thing with regard to luxury motor cars that were imported, 199 cars on the special commodity levy imported by one person, and the loss is something like 1.5 billion. Now, when the public looks at this rhetoric, they look at the budget and say, okay, what does this budget say? And there are three things that IMF said. Number one, establish an advisory committee, independent experts, to support CBOC, so that they can go after the problems that of corruption. Number two, they said publication of asset declaration of the senior officials, which is President, Prime Minister and the ministers, in a designated website for everybody to see. And third, they say amend the National Audit Act to enable the Auditor General to levy a surcharge on officials when they find after the audit. Now, fourth one, last one, is by 2024 March, publish a designated website for public procurement of contracts above 1 billion. Now, Shamil, I would have expected this to be the first point in budget 2024. Unfortunately, I see this in point number 73, way down, and it's just like quarter pager, which just says, you know, that we are following up on the 16-point plan. Now, the question, Shamil, is that, you know, those days when you present budget, it's only a passing of phases that you would see. You know, it doesn't impact you and I per se. But today, Shamil, you have 51% of the estate sector in poverty, 36% of the rural sector in poverty, and 18% of the urban sector. You have 73% of households who are reducing their consumption to live.
So Rohanta, because you're coming from a corporate background, I come from a background of exports, and I was looking forward for budget 2024 to look at how Sri Lanka is going to be directed towards exports, because exports are going to be the key factors as far as Sri Lanka is concerned in the next few years. But I fail to look at any proposal that is being tabled, that was tabled, in terms of exports of this country. Why is that?
It baffles me. Point number one was what I mentioned just now. Point number two, I would say, in the budget was exports. And we know that, you know, you can't rely on a revenue increase of 45% mainly on VAT. You have to look at what are the ways in which you can drive revenue up, especially when you know that as soon as you have a Fitch today just now mentioned that the prices are increasing by 8.47%, which means that further consumption is going to drop, Shamir, in the next year. So one way that you could have, you know, drummed up a little bit of purchasing power at home would be to drive exports and the SMEs to have some kind of increase in income. But as you very rightly said, we have not looked at exports as a strategy. For instance, SEPA. We know that the new ambassador who is coming from India is an expert on trade. Now, his agenda is SEPA. How do I move from free trade agreement to SEPA? And we know that the economy is going to be 6% growth. So, you're sure that is not mentioned. So, I have two concerns on point one and point two.
Right. Thank you very much, Rohan Tatukorala, former chairman of EDB and tourism. Before I give an opportunity to Ravindra to pose a question, I want to pose one more question to Sujiva. Sujiva, they say budgets are about having a magic wand. The Prime Minister of the country, now the President in his capacity as the Minister of Finance, has the ability to pull something out of the black hat. It seems that he's not trying to pull a rabbit out of the black hat. What is he trying to pull? What is he trying to get at?
Yeah, so good question, Shamil. So I think he has been truthful. I think you need to give credit on that. All these years, what we have done is that we have not told the truth to the public. How did we do that? Because we used to hide our budget deficits, right, through SOE losses. So we used to park it, whether it's CB, petroleum, Sri Lankan, railway, you name it, we just used to go and park it. Then what happens? That loss gets parked in the state-owned banks. They go and borrow, you have to cover your losses. I mean, you run a company, you know that. You make a loss, somebody has to finance it.
Whether you like it or not.
Whether you like it, either your owner has to put in money, he has to bring money from home, or you have to borrow from somebody else. So that's what we did. So this time, for the first time, we've been truthful and said, look, we have a problem. That's why the first time they said we have to put in 450 billion. That's a huge amount of money. All your projects are talking, 5 billion, 2 billion, 3 billion, 10 billion. This 450 billion, right? So that is number one. So you need to give credit to President Wickremesinghe on that. But the biggest issue for me, adding on to what Rohantha said, I was looking for this growth story. See, we are talking about it 2048. No, everyone is talking 2048 is a number now. I saw even some of the cricket analysts saying we are going to win the World Cup in 2048. Right? So then I asked why? No, because the people who are going to play in the 2048 team are still not born. It's 25 years down the road, no? So they are not yet born. Right? So this 2048 is the number. So to hit this 2048, I saw Dr. Vijayawardena saying, for the next 25 years, we need to grow close to double digit. 8, 9, 10% year, every year. Right? Next year, our number is less than 2. I think 1.8%, 1.8 is the number that had been given. Right?
But that growth story is not there.
It's not there. That's what I was looking for. So I agree with what Rohantha said. I was looking for that. Where are we going to get the growth from? Where is it coming from? There's nothing in that, in the budget speech. Right? So that is lacking in that budget speech. Right? In that whole document. So that's number one. Number two for me is, so there's so much to talk about on the revenue side. See, on the VAT, see, I think there are two things that we need to be mindful. This VAT, see, the bulk of the revenue is going to come from VAT. It's coming from three things as Suresh explained. First one is the rate increase, is easy to calculate. Number two, they are bringing down the threshold back again, back to 60 million is the proposal.
No, it's not there in the document, but informally.
Informally, they say they want to bring it down. Number three is this removal of this exemption. And you ask a question on this electricity. My take is yes. Electricity and the energy sector will bring in about a 50 billion of revenue. You wait for your January bill. My take is electricity will be included, right? And that's going to hit everyone. It's just ordinary citizen, companies, factories, everyone is going to hit, because the wording in that Annexure 6 is very clear. It says health, education and a few selected food items. And electricity doesn't, and energy doesn't fall into any one of these. And that's a big ticket item. One other thing which I want to share with you, Shamir, is on the expenditure side, right? So I'll just give you, this, no one talks about this. And I've been always saying, we got to rationalize our expenditure. And one of the biggest issues I have, right, is health and education. We got to spend on it. If we don't have a healthy nation, we don't have an educated nation, we can't get out of this rut. 25 years down the road, come 2048, we'll be in the same boat. We'll be having the same discussion. And the allocation is less than 2% of GDP. And you can remember a few years ago, they were asking 5%, right? 6% on the university teachers who are coming out. They're less than 2%. Defense, no one talks. You take the big three firms, their budget documents have nothing on rationalization of expenditure, no on defense. I'll give you some numbers, some unbelievable numbers this is, right? Are you aware that as of, this is what we picked up, We have in the tri-forces 235,000, 85,000 in the police, 235, 85, 310, 25,000 home guards, 335,000, right, 335,000. 15 years after the end of the war, we still have 335,000, and the allocation is going up, right? My take is you can't cut this one down tomorrow and say we are bringing down by half. But I would have loved to see a plan in President Wickremesinghe's speech. This is my 10-year plan to resize our military. We are an island nation. We need to keep that in mind. We are an island nation. Imagine if we had borders with 4 or 5 countries. We want to see a plan, and we need to demand that plan. How are you going to reduce this come 2035? What's going to be our military? How much are we going to spend? How many people are we going to have? I'll give you one more thing. Do you know how many people are there in Samurdhiyan, the so-called development officers? Just under 100,000. What is this 100,000? They are the foot soldiers for the political parties. They are the foot soldiers for the political parties. Samurdhiyan development officers. Between around 95,000 people, say 100,000. You pay 40,000 rupees a month, right? 4 billion a month to maintain the foot soldiers. 12 months, 48 billion, close to 50 billion. Say on all of us are paying PAY tax, no? Say we pay 100 billion. 50% of that, of all the private sector who pays taxes, goes to maintain the foot soldiers of the political parties. So keep that in mind. So make sure you pay your taxes on time, because otherwise these guys can't be paid. 50% of what you pay goes to sustain and maintain this just under 100,000 Samurdhiyan development officers. So we need to talk about this. We are spending too much time just focusing on revenue. See, it's two things to the equation. There's a deficit because your revenue is low and your expenditure is high. So how do you cut your expenditure? At the same time, the same amount of emphasis has to be there on expenditure. And I'm always saying, health and education, we got to spend far more than what we are spending right now. Look at that tragic incident. I was watching your news. That girl who died in Valampitiya, that parapet wall, or that where the taps were fixed, that wall has collapsed. 5 girls, year 1. One has died, 4 are in hospital, another one is critical. I mean, we should be ashamed. But where is the allocation of expenditure? I mean, let's talk about it, because I think it's important. Because it's always on revenue. I think we need to spend same amount of time on this expenditure.
Well, Mr. Mudalige, on the expenses we have, when we look at the budget speech, the President addressing the Parliament said that his government is going to allocate 700 million rupees to develop the fishing sector in an island nation. And in the meantime, an international airport in Hinguraggoda, 2 billion rupees allocated for its basic structuring. Have we learned nothing from our past, Mr. Suresh?
So my thing is, with 2 billion, I don't think you can do anything comes to international airport. That's the first point, right? If you have to make it an international airport, there's minimum sizes on the airstrips, the length and so on. I mean, it will cost you far more than that amount of 2 billion, right? This is like allocating can you remember last year they allocated 200 million to start was it a medical faculty in Uvavellas? Yeah. What can you do with 200 million? You can just put up one classroom. You can put up a medical faculty with 200 million. So just like that, the 2 billion on a airstrip, right? I mean, to put up a medical faculty, you will need 15-20 billion rupees to get a proper medical faculty going with all the, and even I saw even last week the Sabaragamu medical students were protesting, saying that they don't have a professorial unit for their studies. So expenditure allocation, you are right, we have a huge problem. But if you ask me on fishing, I think we should be spending far more. On upgrading our navy, I think that should be our focus. We are an island nation, right? We should have a top navy to make sure that our fishing rights are not violated, the Indian boats are not coming into our territorial waters, and I think every time I think your news eternally goes about this, you know, the territorial waters of the country and so on. So you're right. So that's why. So we have a problem on this expenditure allocation.
So, Suresh, now getting back into the tax aspect of the budget, the estimated total tax revenue stands at 3,820 billion and consists of 2,235 billion taxes from goods and services, 1,080 billion rupees from income tax, and 505 billion taxes from external trade. However, the budget does not disclose the breakup of the detailed tax revenue sources. Why is that?
Correct. So that's why I said, unlike other budgets, the breakup is not given. So it's very
why is that? Why is that? They're trying to hide something, but
well, I don't know.
but I'm trying to figure out what are they trying to hide?
No,
because
I don't know whether
again Sujiva spoke about the fact that state-owned enterprises will be privatized next year. And that aspect, how much of money that is coming in from that is also not mentioned in budget 2024. So there are a lot of grey areas. For me, Sujiv is very optimistic about the budget, but I am not, unfortunately.
Yes, correct.
I'm trying to figure out what is this budget, you know?
Yeah, so correct. From the point of view of number crunching, the numbers are not very elaborative here for a person to carry out a proper analysis and make comments, right? So that's why I said, as you rightly pointed out, in relation to the taxation, what do you get under 3 bullets? Basically, there are 3 numbers given. But normally in a budget, you do get quantification from each proposal. Okay, what is the number that is coming? So that is missing in this one. So we can't comment in relation to that, so I don't know the reason. That's why, to me, basically that's a negative aspect with regard to that, right? Now, having said that thing, there is a policy framework in relation to the taxes that are contained in this budget. Now, the first one is, most of us have been basically addressing this issue with regard to the personal taxes, bring down the personal taxes. So there's a clear message that is coming in this budget speech, pointing out that in relation to personal taxes, it's the top 20% of the population that is subject to that, and in the context that IMF program has started, and within a short period, within 1 year from the IMF program, coming from the IMF program, the government is not in a position to bring down the personal taxes. It's challenging. So that's the statement that is there. I think from one perspective it may be correct also. But having said that thing, I think what IMF has said is basically they have given a particular target to achieve, but how to achieve, where to collect, they have not said. So that freedom is there. So now, in order to, so there's challenge here, because this is not easy, it is easy task. But my point is basically from the perspective of taxation, is there proper diligence, is there enough effort, is there enough time committed to analyze where to collect these taxes in a fair manner? You can
fair and equitable manner.
Fair and equitable manner. So basically, when you want to add tax, just what is happening here right now is, okay, we want more taxes, so we are increasing the VAT rate. That's the simple thing. We are just bringing down the threshold. That's what we hear, and trying to cut down the exemption. So all that should happen in the long run. Now, how should we navigate this process? That is the important thing. That is where basically we have to be cautious there, where we need to put more effort. So here I come to another point. When we look at the IMF website, there's a lot of literature with regard to the tax policy framing in the IMF website also. There's a very important point that they point out. In a country, there has to be a tax policy unit. So this policy unit should consist of should have different subdivisions also. Study direct tax, indirect tax, quantification of the cost and cost benefit analysis of taxes, etc., and the implementation. So different divisions. So in other words, at the top there has to be a team, a unit that looks into the tax framework of the country, come up with the short-term tax policies, long-term tax policies, etc. Now, this is something that is lacking in Sri Lanka, I would say, last 20 years, or not from the inception, we never had that. We have a finance minister, then we have maybe another tax officer helping the finance ministry. That is all we have. Then how are the tax policies formulated in Sri Lanka? Lobby groups from time to time approach the finance minister or the finance ministry and sound their views. So these views, these proposals given by the lobby groups are basically formulated and into the budget, and this is how the policy framework, tax policy framework is being formulated in Sri Lanka.
No, but
now this is not the right way to do this thing. So basically we need to have a team. That team basically should study different aspects and come up, listen to the lobby groups also, and formulate the tax policy implementation, etc. in Sri Lanka. That is what is lacking in Sri Lanka.
So budgets always, Suresh, is problematic because what I'm trying to figure out is a budget usually has to get the nod of the cabinet before it's being presented to Parliament, right? In Sri Lanka, this happens on the morning of the budget day, and I don't know how the cabinet ministers approve the so-called budget, because it takes at least 2 to 3 hours to understand the budget proposals in full and understand the brevity of what's there in the budget. But the cabinet of ministers approved this budget within half an hour. I'm trying to figure out, is that even possible?
No, I'm not sure about that point. I'm not aware whether this goes to the cabinet before.
It goes in the morning. It goes.
Not within my knowledge, so I do not comment on that one, because to me I don't think so.
No, so the cabinet has to approve the budget before it goes to the Parliament, where the finance minister
in the morning, and then it's presented.
Presented.
Okay, maybe I'm not aware of
right.
that one. Yeah.
Right. So, Raj, interestingly, when you look at the numbers that Sujiva spoke about, he spoke about the 90,000 foot soldiers, 100,000 foot soldiers that are the political stooges who are on the ground, who are as far as some of the beneficiary scheme is concerned. Now, the government has proposed to increase the salaries, not salaries, the cost of living allowance, by 10,000 rupees. We in the private sector are paying taxes of up to 36%. And why are we funding a state sector that is filled of political appointees? Why must the private sector do it? Why must we take the burden? I remember President Ranil Wickremesinghe addressing Parliament said this is a bitter pill to swallow. But I don't see anything bitter in this budget 2024. This is just earmarked for next year's 2 elections.
So I think in terms of the taxes, I think the reason why we didn't increase anything else is because I think we've exhausted most of our options. You can't increase personal income tax, VAT was only option, and we did that. The only other option is, and I think the sentiment is right, where the existing taxpayers are increasingly frustrated that they're paying more and more taxes. The only way to go about it is you expand your tax base, which is what I think the TIN registration, all of this comes into. Because what happens is that according to the IRD itself, there are less than 300,000 individuals registered for personal income tax. In 2019, it was over 1 million people registered for personal income tax. So widening your tax base is crucial, and I think there are many ways to go about widening your tax base.
My question is, how fair is it? How fair is it? The private sector in the country, it's hard-earned money. And why are you paying 100,000 individuals, as Sujiva said before? Why are we funding the salaries of 100,000 people? That is not necessary. Where is the haircut in terms of the public sector?
So Sri Lanka has a bloated public sector, and you're very right to say Sri Lanka has a bloated public sector. In terms of defense, we have one of the we are in the top 10 highest military to per capita ratios in the top 10. And with Samurdhi, of course, I think there are a lot of literature on how it's politicized and how it's not targeting the right people. And I think even Veit has written a paper to say you don't need Samurdhi to target. You don't need Samurdhi to send people in, and you don't need the Grama Niladhari. You can use electricity bill and electricity targeting, which is done internationally, to identify the poor. So if all you need is identifying the vulnerable and give them give them concessions, you can do that using the electricity bill, which is collected every month. You have updated data. If they consume below, let's say 60 kilowatts using 2016 data, obviously, you can call them as poor because they're below the median household income. So there are ways to go about it, but the question should be posed to the government as to why they're not doing it when there is written analysis behind. I think I'll always go back to a constant thing that I say is that every proposal announced in the budget, including the airports and all of that, the question comes in, oh, it's not enough. I think every proposal needs to have at least a cost-benefit analysis and say, is this my proposal? This is the cost-benefit, and this is the cost, this is the benefit, and here I am rationalizing my cost. Otherwise, it's just I can pull any number out of the hat, as you said, and draw up the budget. So I think asking for analysis.
Whatever they're trying to pull out of the hat it's going to come very, very hard. It's not going to come easy.
It is not going to come easy. I think even the VAT is going to have inflationary pressures, and it's going to be extremely difficult when the central bank has announced a target of 5% and Fitch saying 8.7. The budget in itself you can calculate and says 9.5. So it's going to be a tricky situation for the government in, do I let inflation go up and collect more revenue and hit the people, or do I control inflation and forego my revenue? Is going to be interesting.
So Raj, are you suggesting that this budget is not practical? Is it a fairy tale or is
so I think the fairy tale word comes from the budget speech in itself. It's a fairy tale because historically we've never met the revenue targets, and historically we've never justified how we are going to collect revenue. This time also we have not justified how we are going to collect that revenue. We have not provided any analysis. So business as usual will give you results as usual. If you are doing the same thing that you used to do previously, you're going to get the same result. That means you're not going to meet your revenue target. So now the question is there any analysis that we can see? Because obviously you can calculate the rate increase, but exemptions, how much are you going to collect? Even though there are budget estimates that give you total VAT collection, I don't know how much I'm going to collect through exemptions, through removing exemptions, how much am I going to collect through the rate increase alone. So without that, it's very hard to justify that, hey, I'm going to collect my revenue. And even with all of this, we are not in the IMF path. So the IMF has a debt sustainability analysis, and I think we are around, we're falling short for the 2024 revenue target by 335 billion.
So you're saying that we might not get the second tranche that we are eagerly looking forward to.
So the second tranche, according to the IMF press release, is contingent on two things. One is the prior actions which the IMF has not made public yet. Second is completing debt restructuring. So at least getting financing assurances for debt restructuring. And that is your only hope now. You've done DDR. You've not finalized external debt restructuring. And external debt restructuring is based on a debt sustainability analysis that I think is quite outdated, because we are not meeting the IMF targets for 2023 and 24 based on the budget. So you will ideally have to redo your debt sustainability analysis to explain this. And just to give you one example, for example, interest cost. The IMF says should be around 2.4 trillion. Budget says it's going to be 2.7. So there itself you are seeing a deviation, you're going away from the target, you're worsening. So you need to redo your DSA and renegotiate it based on that, because otherwise I'll go back to my initial point, is you will not have a sustainable recovery.
But then is the IMF also practical, because the IMF is proposing that we should increase our income compared to the GDP from 8% to 15% by 3 years, by 2025.
Yeah, correct.
Is there any country in the world who have achieved these targets, increasing the GDP by
so that's why
6 to 7%?
Yeah, so if you look at income tax, right, it's interesting. In 2022, it was 1.7 trillion. This year we are looking at 2.5, 2.6, and next year is going up to 3.8. So it's basically doubling from 22 to 24. So you are paying double the, you are paying a multiple of what you paid. 2022 1.7. 2023 2.6, and it's going up to 3.8. From 1.7 to 3.8 within 2 years is more than double. So one other thing we need to keep in mind is just on this expenditure. See, these people are asking this 20,000 salary increase now. See, these guys have no clue that whether it's sustainable or not. All these trade unions. See, we have 1.3, 1.4 million public sector employees. Another 600,000 to 700,000 pensioners. I hit the ceiling when I saw 700,000 pensioners somewhere in the budget speech. 700,000, so it's 2 million. 2 million people, if you give 1,000 rupees per month, that costs you 2 billion. 2 billion to give 1,000 rupees to this 2 million, right? You give 10,000, 20 billion a month. 20 billion a month. 12 months? 240 billion you need to give a 10,000 increase. 240 billion. You give 20,000, you need 480 billion. So these people, whether it's from the JVP or whether it's from the trade unions or whoever it is who is asking, have no clue what are we, I mean, when you ask, see, if you want to go and negotiate something, you must negotiate something which is doable and practical. No? You go and say, give us 480 billion handout because we want 20,000 salary increase for the government servants and the pensioners. I mean, there's no way that we can do it unless you just keep printing money and running the Biagama factory 24/7. There's no way that you can do this.
But now you can't even print money because of the...
That's what I'm saying with the new act. I mean, what they're asking is simply unaffordable. Is not unaffordable, not practical, and not doable at all. Because it's such a huge, because these numbers are huge. I mean, 700,000 pensioners and 1.3, 1.4 in the government sector. You are looking at straight 2 million people, which is funded by the government, which is funded by you and I through either direct taxes or indirect taxes.
But since Mr. Mudalike, in your opening,
so should I add something?
Since we are talking about the public sector and the salaries, I want to raise a point here. Point is, I am proposing that the income tax on the public servants in relation to their salaries should be abolished, because when you analyze what is going on here, it's illogical. Now, you take 100 rupees from the consolidated fund and give it as salary to the public sector employee. So from that 36 rupees he has to pay to the, not 36 rupees, I am taking the highest tax rate, say 36 rupees to the Inland Revenue Departments as taxes. Then the Commissioner General Inland Revenue has to remit that 36 rupees to the consolidated fund. So instead of that, what should happen is 64 rupees salary should be given to the public sector employee and abolish that tax on that tax on that salary. So now here what is happening, that 36 rupees is in a cycle. No, it comes from the consolidated fund to the employee, public sector employee, from the public sector employee to the Commissioner General, from Commissioner General it goes back to the consolidated fund.
And then the leakage happens.
And the leakage, and tax consultants and probably the officers at the Revenue Department also basically take a portion of that one. So if you abolish the income tax on the public sector employee in relation to the emoluments, in relation to the salary, that basically give enough time for the the commissioners at the Inland Revenue Department also to focus on other areas where effective taxes could be collected for the state, because this 36 rupees is just in a cycle. So I don't know why basically we are having a thing called income tax on the public servants.
In other words, what he's saying is pay net of tax.
Yes, exactly.
So Rohanta, in budget 2024, it says that there has been an uptick in foreign remittances as well as tourism in the country. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think that the tourists that we are attracting as a nation can bolster the country's economy, or are you of the opinion, like many in the foreign tourism industry say, that the tourists that we are attracting to Sri Lanka are not high rollers or high spenders?
See, Shamil, it depends on how you look at it. I mean, this year we will achieve, I think, 1.7 million tourists coming in, and the budget, the target was 1.5. Currently, if you look at the mix that are coming, which is somewhat similar to the mix that was there before. So the question is, if you set a budget of 5 million is what you're trying to go for, what kind of promotional work are you doing to achieve that 5 million, so that you up the quality of tourists coming in? So currently we are having a nice run coming, which was more to do with, I think, revenge tourism, where people just wanted to travel and you have a huge trust of people coming in. But now again we see the flight movement going down globally because of the war. So right now the kind of tourists that will have to be traveling are going to be strongly based on the promotional work which you do. So the private and the public sector are doing a damn good job, in my view, in terms of getting the number going. And the budget says some very interesting things. They allocated 750 million for the provincial tourism boards, which is a good start, I think, and it should be commended. But then there should be a very good master plan for each of the provinces. So for instance, UNDP and EU contracted us to do a master plan together with SLTDA for Central Province and Nuwa Province. And in the Central Province, one of the biggest things we saw was that 65% of every visitor goes to Dalda Maligawa. But during the Perahera, the biggest problem is sanitation and toilets. So now those are basic infrastructure. If you look at the two botanical gardens which have the top ratings once again in the Central Province, they have problem with regard to parking. So now you have to spend the 750 million on the key hurt points that a consumer really wants or a visitor wants to do. If you take Ella, they want a public toilet. There is no public toilet. So now these are, if you look at, we never had a demand issue, Shamil. Our problem was that our supply chain was not ready. And until you have a structured way in which our infrastructure is to be developed with, I just gave you 2 or 3 examples, you cannot actually start really driving the tourism industry. But Shamil, I just like to highlight something which nobody has highlighted before, which is, when you do a plan, you have to have a scientific basis. And I just highlighted 2 points, which was the public governance issue, which is the critical issue that has not been addressed. And second, I just mentioned the exports. Nobody has ever talked about what were the plans that were implemented last year. My colleague who works at Verite knows this because they have done this study. 68% of the budget proposals of last year is not known on who is actually accountable for, who is actually, whether there is any progress. And there are 68% of the key projects which account for 97% of the value, which there is absolutely no transparency on what has happened. So until we correct this whole area of saying, just not putting a paper on paper, but you have to drive it to every line ministry, whether it be Ministry of Industries or the Ministry of Fisheries, and then you need to have an action plan and an owner. This is just only a piece of paper, and that's what it is. And you ask this question, why does the cabinet of ministers approve? Because when you have 67% no visibility, the document comes and you approve. That's the reality.
We are a country, Rohan, I don't know whether you remember, we had a president in our country who knows the cabinet decisions that are passed only when he reads the papers the next morning.
So the point I'm saying...
You don't want to comment on that?
When you have a...
But he is head of the cabinet.
Yeah.
He is head of the cabinet, but he only sees the cabinet decisions in the morning newspapers, the next morning newspapers.
We have seen this continuously, Shamil, and until the public sector understands that they have to be a little bit more authoritative and accountable for the actions they say, that's why you have a set of people who come in the morning and approve at 10 o'clock and it's presented in the evening, and then you have, after 6 months, independent organization like Verite comes and says 68% of the budget proposals, there is no data, there is no owner. Now, you talked about Ministry of Fisheries. They are one of the ministries that are very well performing last year. It has been highlighted by Verite. So, whatever proposal that they have been put to, at least we know the guys will implement it.
So, Suji, yes.
Rohanta, how will the increase in the VAT affect the people in the tourist sector, especially the entrepreneurs? Will this encourage them to be a part of the tourist sector, or will this push them further away from the tourist sector?
See, tourism sector is a very interesting, the guys have been battered in the last 10 years.
Exactly.
Whether it be the war, whether it be the Easter tax, whether it be the economic crisis, they always are very resilient and they come back. So it's very strange. It's something like our tea industry, which Shamil is totally aware. We always hit back. Tourism industry right now is just picking up, and we see that duration that people are staying has increased, and we also see the number of people who are coming with regard to the quality of the tourists is picking up. And you could see this when you go on the net and see all the boutique hotels which have been advertised. It shows that they are doing focused target marketing for the consumer to come in. You know what I'm saying? So right now this 3% VAT is not the issue. The issue is that the increase in price of electricity. You know, that is unbearable. And if you're looking at a 80%, another 18% growth that's going to hit, that industry is in the red. And I think Sujio mentioned this at some forum, that the debt stock in the tourism industry is 700 billion. And now the banks are coming after the property, saying moratorium is over, you guys have to pay. So our key issue is actually, you know, what happens to that debt stock vis-a-vis whether, you know, you can, you know, kind of drive that in relation to the electricity price increase, because you're not having a return. So that's a challenge for tourism.
Sujit, when you look at the budget, because you are quite optimistic about the budget 2024, a lot of allocations have been made to revolutionize the digital space in Sri Lanka as well as the IT sector. You see this as good steps moving forward? Because when we compare countries like India, the digital revolution comes directly under Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The AI hubs that are being established through the government establishments in India comes directly under the Prime Minister. So those are very progressive steps. Do you see that happening in Sri Lanka as well, where President Ranil Wickremesinghe would take a good hand to steer the country towards this AI revolution that we are now readily talking about?
Yeah, just one quick one, just to add on to what Rohantha mentioned on this. I don't want to dampen the spirit on tourism. I think it's a low-hanging fruit. I think we all need to support it. This debt stock of 700 billion, right, which is, I have analysis by bank, by which bank the 700 billion is. It's simply unsustainable. It's as bad as the country's debt. And it's a matter of time before the tourism sector defaults on this. Right, just like the country defaulted on 12th of April 2022 on our external debt. So this needs, in my view, a task force with people like Rohantha being there, from the banking sector, government, and the tourism sector guys, and see simple mathematics, Shami. Say you get $2 billion, we'll say we earn from tourism, just like say tea, 2 billion, but that's 700 billion rupees at 350. So you get 10% on this, on the 700 billion is 70 billion on the income. 70 billion is insufficient just to pay interest on the debt. But you have 700 billion without, by the time we meet next time, Shamil, it will be $1 trillion. It will be 1,000 billion debt stock in the tourism sector. So it's completely unsustainable and no one is talking about it. Banks also just carrying it. This has to be addressed and addressed immediately. Coming to your question, President Wickremesinghe, as you know, has been talking about AI, about digitalization, you know, and so on. So I'm happy on this. But I'm more practical. We are still struggling for the last 2-3 years. We can't award the contract for the digital ID. We'll be talking, we can't just award that contract even. And without the digital ID, whatever these gentlemen talk about expanding the tax base, collecting more revenue, collecting data, nothing of that sort can be done. You need this. You ask the question now, when you want to renew your revenue license, you are supposed to go to, what do? You go to the Pradeshya Sabha. When you go to the Pradeshya Sabha, you go and say my tax file number is 574. That guy doesn't know. You can just put something and come, because he's not connected. He's not connected to the inland revenue. You just fill in the blanks on some form and say you have a TIN number. And you will give some printout also. He will accept it and file it somewhere and keep it. You can't check it. So the only way to do this is to get this digital ID going. And the Indian government, I believe, wanted to give it as one of their grants, if I'm not mistaken on this. And we were scared, saying, the Indian, our data. I mean, they can't understand even right now, whether it's the police or army or whatever it is, when they are using a mobile provider for their internet, right? All your information is available and accessible. We are unable to award this digital ID contract. So I am fully with you. Needs to be done. Should have been done yesterday. I hope at least it's a 1-year project. This Aadhaar card, they did it for 1.2 within about 5 years. We can't do for 22 million people, surely.
And the Aadhaar card system is quite
Absolutely.
It's very good and it works very well in India.
See, that is why if you want, see, only way we are all talking about, I mean, we all know this 36% personal income tax. If you ask me, Shamil, it's too high. I think we can manage with 30% and have the same amount of revenue if we structure it properly. Right? We can do 30% in company taxes, we can do 30% in as our highest rate for personal income taxes. How do you do it? I mean, only way until we realize as a law-abiding citizen that we have to pay taxes, Shamil, we have to collect it at source. If you don't collect it at source, what Suresh said happens, the leakage starts. The gravy train, you know what you call it, you know, this will not happen. So you have to collect it at source. How do you collect it at source? Easy. That's what they are saying now. When you are registering a plot of your land, vehicle, building permit, opening a current account, we can extend it more. When you are applying for a credit card, why do you need a credit card if you are not a taxpayer? You just have a debit card. If you are getting a credit card, you can ask, say, you have to have a TIN number, right? If your kids are going to a private school, TIN number. How can you afford private school?
I know.
My kids went to government school, so I can afford to talk about. And I also went to a government school.
No, but I know, Suresh, there are schools in Sri Lanka that request for the TIN number from parents now when they are admitting students to schools.
Yeah.
You know.
No, because otherwise they will default on the fees. So easily, how many kids must be going to a private schools today all around the island from 100,000 could be. So all those people should be paying taxes, right? Easy ones. You can't, because if you are going to a private school, surely you are earning more than 100,000 rupees. Look at the see the other easy one, air tickets. See the 4 most common destinations that Sri Lankans travel: Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, Bangkok, Dubai. Every day there are about 2 flights each to these 8 to 10 flights a day. Say 200 in a flight, 2,000 people are traveling. 365 days calculate. All these people should be paying taxes unless you are going for employment to the Middle East or anywhere else. Nobody else should be issued a air ticket if you don't have a TIN number. So you must collect it. Can you remember those days? The embarkation tax was collected by the travel agent.
Yes, 500 rupees.
500 rupees, and they used to clip it, staple it to your ticket. That is because you have to collect it at source. If you don't collect it at source, that's why I'm always a believer saying even the withholding tax, which is at 5% now, I've always said make it 10%. You will collect another 100 billion straight off. When you are because you have to collect it at source until such time we realize that, come on, we got to pay our taxes. But now we have a problem because because there is no accountability on how it is being spent. That's why we have issue the taxpayer in public. But that's a different story. We all have to pay our taxes. So that's why the collecting at source, and is to answer your question, yes, digitalization is a must.
Mr. Mudalege, in your opening remarks, you said that this budget is not an election budget. While that is said, the salaries in the public sector are increased from April, while the taxes are increased from January.
Yeah.
Are you still suggesting that this is not an election budget?
So they have done so in my view, they have done a small tweak on, they have put a bit of a doosra or a googly.
But then
you know why? Because the salary increment is given closer to the election.
Yes.
Right, because the election will be either in that same quarter of the second quarter, you said April, which is the second quarter, or the third quarter. So you feel it more. So this is a small doosra or a googly that has been bold here. You make it closer to the possible election date.
So you are suggesting that
November.
It could be
budget target
even before. It could be third quarter and not the fourth quarter. So you may give it closer to the date so that it's high impact. So, but the problem is,
are people so oblivious to what's going on? Sujeev, I'm just thinking, okay, do people think that just because it's high impact, they have to vote in a government of this sort? I don't know. Is it?
Shamil, the issue is this: see our voting public, right? I mean, you know them, no? I mean, they just don't think about what we are talking here today, no? they used to, you know that, right? If I put it in Sinhalese, whether it's a takarang sheet or the toilet seat or a bath packet or a arakku bottle, they used to vote. I mean, we have gone through this, right? So for them, 10,000 into, see, we need to understand this. 1.5 million people in the government sector. That means what? Roughly, not 1.5 million families, because there may be 2 people working in the government sector. Easily you are talking maybe easily a million families. 2 people voting, 2 million votes you are looking at, or minimum, say the parents. If you have another child, it's 3 million, it's big impact. And voting, and mind you, this is voting people, and only our voting number is what, 11 or 12 million. Covers 25% of the voting crowd. So
I have a different perspective.
It's a big impact.
So I want to give 2 minutes each for each speaker to wrap up and sum up and give us an overview as to what is the way forward for Sri Lanka. Let's start off with Rohantha.
Shamira, you asked the question, is it a good budget? My answer is, it is not a budget that is going to solve the key issues of the country. And I've told you, 1 is on the governance, number 2 on the strategy with regard to revenue generation through exports. It's not conclusive in terms of actually focusing on the issues of the country. And the third one that I like to share is that we are not addressed the issue that we are faced with currently. I mean, you have tax revenue increasing by 44%, our recurrent expenditure is going up by 52% as at now. So whatever that we earn, we are paying more. So if this is the way that the organization is going to be run, I'm saying organization means a country, that's why people have no credibility on a budget. So Shamil, Sri Lanka is not naive. I mean, 2010 you had a group of people who gave 70% votes. In 2015 at 2:30 in the night, that team was kicked out. And then you had a group of people who were brought in who attacked the central bank. They were taken out by 2018. Sri Lankan consumer is very decisive. They don't come and, they're not aggressive, but they make that decision. And 2021, you have a guy who comes with 2/3 majority, he's kicked out. So it's,
you forgot one part, Rohantha. 2019, the party that was kicked out had 1 seat in parliament, and that person became the president of the country last year.
But
just to remind you,
you're right, Shamil. I mean, given the devil is due, the guy has done some justice to bring stability, which I put my hand up to. But the question is, on this budget, the issues are not handled. So if you ask me my summary, I've given you 3 reasons why. Number 1, governance key issue, which IMF also said. I have not seen a task force appointed to correct. Why is it that the digital IDs can be awarded even for the last 2-3 years? Number 2, I've told you, the second one happens to be export and tourism strategy development. There is no content. Third one is, if you look at the current issue, where your expenditure is more than your income, which is also not been addressed. So how do you have a strategic plan for a country and say it's good? Doesn't make sense.
Thank you very much, Rohantha Korala, former chairman of EDB and tourism. Raj.
Yes, so I think in terms of overview or like the outlook for 2024, I think the critical areas are revenue, interest costs. Those are the 2 things, because just to give you numbers, Sri Lanka has one of the highest interest cost to revenues in the world. Sri Lanka is the highest at 78% for 2022. So out of your revenue, if you collect 100, 78 rupees goes for paying interest, and you're with 20 rupees left with revenue to do anything. So bringing down interest cost to revenue is critical. One is you either increase revenue, which is becoming increasingly difficult, or you have to reduce interest costs. And Sri Lanka currently is not in a pathway to reduce the interest cost, which is a bigger burden for Sri Lanka. And this has been a constant sign. So since 1990, Sri Lanka is the only country that has been in the top 10 of interest cost to revenue ratios ever since, and we've been the first since 2020. Also, to give you numbers, the second highest has a interest to revenue ratio of 27%, so that's a huge gap, 78 and 27. So bringing that down is, I think, very critical for Sri Lanka. And unless you bring that down, you don't see sustainable recovery. What you will see is that in a few years down the line, you might end up with another debt restructuring, which is not the ideal case that Sri Lanka needs to be in. So my solution for Sri Lanka is that your only way out is you either have to do your debt sustainability analysis again, because talking about growth in silo without talking about inflation, or talking about expenditure without talking about revenue alone doesn't help a lot. Bringing it all together in a debt sustainability analysis allows you to charter a path for sustainable recovery, which can be negotiated upon. But looking at the only debt sustainability analysis public, that's the IMF's one, we are not in that path. So that needs to be redone to say, okay, we've not stuck to the earlier path, we are redoing it, and this is the path that seems most feasible. And unless you see that, it's very hard to even project what's going to happen in the near future.
Raj, how do you view the financial literacy of parliamentarians in Sri Lanka?
I think there was a central bank survey that was done on financial literacy, and it did come out pretty low. But it's more than financial literacy, it's political will. Because like the withholding tax here, we wrote a paper way long ago and I co-authored it to say bring it to 10%, you will get 90 billion more based on old numbers. Now it could even increase, which was never done, which is analysis that's published. And I still horn upon cigarette taxes. A lot of think tanks agree on what to do. So it's not the lack of knowledge at this point, I think it's more the lack of political will to enact those actions. Withholding tax is a no-brainer at this point. And you could have done all of these multiple small revenue proposals and said, okay, VAT doesn't need to go up all the way to 18, which is a historical high. Maybe it can go up a bit, because VAT is an inflationary tax. Withholding is not. It's that source. So there are other ways of going about it.
How do you view the reactions of the main opposition in Parliament with regard to Budget 2024?
Again, just to qualify, I'm no political expert here. But I think the overall
from an economic
perspective, I think there was not enough talk on what's critical, and I think what's critical is that there is no analysis to validate the budget. So the budget lacks credibility in terms of all of its projections, and that is why all of us are debating here in terms of, okay, does the number make sense, because there's nothing to base it on.
Right. Thanks a lot, Raj. Suresh.
Yeah. Final comments. Well. Taxation is an art, taxation is a science also. Now, what I see in Sri Lanka is nobody is basically putting enough effort to get the tax system correct. Now, why is that? Because we don't have anyone who is accountable for making tax policies. Now, take the case of 2019, there was a big crash. Why did that happen? That is because who's taking the accountability, who's taking the, the accountability for that one? Why there's no person to take the accountability? Because we don't have a proper structure to formulate tax policies in Sri Lanka. This is why I keep quoting this IMF thing. What they say is correct. Sri Lanka badly needs a tax policy unit. Forget VAT rate, forget what should be exempt from VAT, all this withholding tax and all those things. Those are minor things. We don't have a main thing correct, which is basically the hierarchy, the top policy making unit. If that is there, then all the other things will come into place. So my recommendation is we have to start from there. We need to create that tax policy unit, which is recommended by IMF. I have been talking about this during the last 10 years. I have been using the term National Tax Council. So that is devoid of any influence from political pressures, and they take decisions taking the best interest of the Sri Lankan economy. Yes, they will listen to the lobby groups, but they will not buy everything the lobby groups are giving. So it's not the lobby groups that are going to formulate the tax policies, that this committee, and they will look into everything, including the implementation, what measures to be taken. So if we get that unit going, then things will fall into place. So this country situation, sometimes the country is doing well, sometimes the country economy is not doing well. Those are basically like, sometimes when you go to a cricket match, okay, it's raining, the pitch is wet, pitch is fast. If you are a good batsman, you know how to bat, irrespective of the quality of the pitch. So when it comes to tax also, there are different techniques that could be used to suit the circumstances, but for that basically you need to have the right people manning that tax unit. So that is what should be there first.
Yeah. Right. Thank you very much, Suresh, for your thoughts. Sujiv.
Yeah, so just one thing which I want to highlight is policy consistency. I'll give you one simple example before I conclude. The VAT rates. This is shocking, these numbers. In 2016, late 2016, we had 11%. 11%. By 17-18, we were 15%. 2019 to 22 came down back again to 8%. So 11, 15, back to 8. In 2022, 12%. Part of 22, 15%. From next month, 18%. By the time you and I meet next time after the budget, it will be, I can guarantee you, it will not be 18%. It will have changed. So it just shows how difficult it is to, you as a, I mean, you run a company, to forecast, plan. How do you run a business when there is so much policy inconsistency? So something that we need to really demand from government, whatever the rate, make it 20%, but keep it for 5 years. Don't change it, right? So we haven't seen that, the policy consistency. Coming back, what's there on my wish list? First one, I like the budget. One reason is President has clearly said there's nothing called a free lunch. We have to manage by ourselves. We got to make sure that our revenues are sufficient to pay for expenditure. But as you said, we are still not there. We are still getting close to about 9% budget deficit, just below double digit, which is not good. Right? So we have a long way to go. That's number one. Second one is fiscal austerity. We have to make sure the government commits themselves to fiscal austerity. What is fiscal austerity? No freebies, no handouts, no free lunches. Somebody has to pay for it. So that's why I said, being an election year, and we haven't given a salary increase for some time for the public sector, I think there was a need to do it. But we need to make sure, because we just can't afford anything. Third one, I don't see that, nothing on exports, no growth plan. That is disappointing. The last point is law and order. If we don't get our law and order in place, I think we will never get out of this rut. And when I say law and order, is the three basic institutions: the police, the Attorney General's Department, and the judiciary. We got to keep strengthening these three. And if you don't, I think we are in serious trouble. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sujeev Mudalge, Chartered Accountant. Sujeev, now on full retirement, we wish you all the very best.
Thank you very
25
much.
years at PwC, 6 years heading the organization, and you've held many illustrious leadership roles at many organizations. So we wish you all the very best on retirement, and looking forward to seeing you on Face the Nation.
Thank you very much.
In the future as well. Thanks a lot, Suresh Pereira, Principal, Head of Tax and Regulatory, KPMG Sri Lanka. It was a good analysis that KPMG did yesterday on the budget as well, Suresh. It was very insightful. You all covered a lot of ground. Let's hope and pray that the parliamentarians get a good hint of what is in store for next year, and take the right decision when the budget comes up for voting in the next few days, next few weeks. Thank you very much, Raj, as always, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation. Thanks a lot, Rohantha, for joining us on Face the Nation. You've been very vocal on how Sri Lanka should progress for better. The silver lining has to be at least looked upon even now, because there's always a light end of the dark tunnel. Thank you very much, Rohan. Thank you very much, Attorney at Law Ravindra Jayakudi, for joining us this evening on Face the Nation after a very long time. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. The budget is not just a collection of numbers, but an expression of our values and aspirations. So when the budget comes in for voting in the next couple of days, weeks, parliamentarians, think about the people, think about the next election, and take the right decision. Take care and good night.